In the long shadow of Hollywood's golden age, few names evoke the gentle warmth and quiet dignity of Johnny Crawford. He was not a brash leading man or a tempestuous starlet. Rather, he arrived on screen like a gentle breeze, steady, familiar, and comforting. As young Mark McCain on The Rifleman, Johnny wasn't merely acting, he seemed to live within the role. Audiences didn't just watch him grow up, they felt they knew him. His wide-eyed innocence, tempered with grit and loyalty, made him the kind of boy every father hoped to raise and every viewer wanted to protect. He was, in every sense, television's golden boy. And yet, away from the spotlight, Johnny's life unfolded with far more complexity. While fans remember the bright beginnings, a child actor turned teen heartthrob, a musician with a golden voice, a Western hero in prime time, few knew the quiet battles that marked his later years. His was not a life defined by scandal or spectacle. Rather, it was a story of grace under fading light, of a man who gave everything to his craft, only to face a cruel irony in the end. A final chapter marked by forgetfulness, silence, and loss. What became of this once celebrated star? How did Johnny, whose face was once a fixture in American living rooms, slip so gently into obscurity? And what does his journey tell us? Not just about the pressures of fame, but about the enduring power of legacy, love, and memory. His story begins not on a dusty set or a glittering soundstage, but in a modest Los Angeles home, surrounded by music, family, and ambition. Long before he held a rifle or faced a camera lens, Johnny Crawford was a boy with a spark in his eye and a song in his heart. And while many would remember him as the brave, loyal son of Lucas McCain, the truth of Johnny's life, its quiet triumphs and final heartbreaks, reveals a far more poignant tale. This is not just the story of a television icon. It is the story of a boy who captured America's heart, a man who lived on his own terms, and a legacy that speaks softly but echoes still. Let us return now to where it all began, to the early days of studio lights, unscripted smiles, and a family whose love for art shaped the path of one unforgettable child. Johnny Crawford entered the world on March 26, 1946, in Los Angeles, a city where ambition and artistry danced hand in hand. His family, though not dazzlingly famous, had creativity stitched into its very fabric. His grandfather, Alfred Eugene Marin, was a respected violinist in Europe before bringing his talent to American orchestras. His mother played piano, and his brother Robert would go on to carve his own niche in the entertainment world. In the Crawford home, music and storytelling weren't distractions, they were daily rituals. It was within this environment of quiet artistry and encouragement that Johnny first showed his gift. By age 9, he was already auditioning, chasing something intangible but unmistakably magnetic. His break came not from a blockbuster film or a wealthy backer, but from a children's variety program that would soon become iconic, the Mickey Mouse Club. In 1955, Johnny was chosen as one of the original 24 Mouseketeers. Just a boy with neatly combed hair and a toothy grin, he stood on the threshold of national fame. But there was an unusual twist, one that seems almost impossible to imagine today. Despite his role on a major network production, Johnny was never paid for his work on the show. Neither he nor his family demanded it. In fact, when his agent raised the issue, the Crawfords gently insisted that exposure was worth more than a check. That kind of thinking was typical of the time, and even more typical of the Crawfords. They believed in craft, in experience, and in opportunity. Johnny's stint as a Mouseketeer, while brief, was foundational. It gave him a platform, it gave him confidence, and it introduced him to the relentless rhythms of show business. Early call times, bright lights, and the quiet loneliness that often followed once the camera stopped rolling. But for Johnny, the thrill outweighed the cost. He wasn't dazzled by celebrity. He was driven by curiosity and a natural ease in front of the lens. His youthful charm, paired with an unmistakable sincerity, made him a casting director's dream. Before long, he moved beyond the Mouseketeers, not because he had to, but because he was ready. His journey was only just beginning. What lay ahead would be a cascade of performances, a rapid succession of roles across film and television. But it all began here, in a small studio with a borrowed spotlight and a little boy who seemed born to step into it. After parting ways with the Mickey Mouse Club, Johnny Crawford didn't retreat from the industry. He ran toward it with open arms. In the years that followed, he built a resume that most adult actors would envy, let alone a child. From westerns to anthology dramas, his face became a familiar presence across the television landscape of the late 1950s. His first film appearance came in The Sons of Katie Elder, where he shared the screen with none other than John Wayne. It was a modest role, but for young Johnny, it was a moment of transformation. Standing beside such a towering figure in American cinema, he found a new sense of confidence. The camera didn't intimidate him, it invited him. And he accepted wholeheartedly. In 1956, his talents were spotlighted in The Little Boy Lost, aired as part of Lux Video Theater. The performance was tender, raw, and deeply affecting, proof that Johnny was not simply a cute child actor, but a performer capable of stirring real emotion. That same year, he appeared in a rare color episode of The Lone Ranger, an exciting distinction in an era when most television was still broadcast in black and white. The episode, filled with action and moral clarity, suited Johnny perfectly. The next 2.5 years saw him working at a pace few actors, young or old, could manage. He took on nearly 60 television roles, an extraordinary number by any measure. Among these were appearances on The Loretta Young Show, the crime drama The Sheriff of Cochise, and a heartfelt role in Courage of Black Beauty. These weren't just jobs, they were building blocks in a career defined by consistency and craftsmanship. What made Johnny stand out was not only his talent, but his adaptability. He could play the solemn child, the scrappy sidekick, or the innocent bystander, always believable, always sincere. In an era when many child actors were reduced to caricatures, Johnny brought a gentle realism to every role. He understood timing, he respected the craft, and he listened to directors, to co-stars, to the quiet demands of the scene. By 1958, his work on Tales of Wells Fargo as Tommy Peel and his role in The Restless Gun had cemented his status as one of television's most promising young performers. Audiences recognized him. Producers requested him. And yet, fame had not yet altered his demeanor. He remained thoughtful, soft-spoken, and earnest. It was clear that Johnny was on the verge of something bigger, a role that would not only define his career, but etch his name into the heart of American pop culture. That moment was just around the corner. When The Rifleman premiered in 1958, it arrived not with the glitz of a grand Hollywood opening, but with something quieter and far more enduring: heart. At its center was a widowed Civil War veteran, Lucas McCain, and his young son Mark. Together, they navigated life in the New Mexico territory, facing hardship, injustice, and personal growth with grit and compassion. And at the heart of it all was Johnny Crawford. At just 12 years old, Johnny stepped into the role of Mark McCain with a maturity beyond his years. His performance wasn't precocious or polished in the way many child actors appeared. It was real. He gave the character depth, warmth, and vulnerability, anchoring the show in a father-son relationship that felt authentic. His chemistry with Chuck Connors, who played Lucas, was unmistakable. It wasn't simply that the two acted well together. They complemented one another. Where Connors brought stoic strength, Johnny brought emotional clarity. The bond they created on screen became the soul of the series. The Rifleman was groundbreaking in more ways than one. It was among the first television dramas to center a single father as the lead, a bold departure from the traditional family models that populated the small screen at the time. Viewers connected with this dynamic deeply. They saw in Mark a boy trying to make sense of the world, and in Lucas, a man doing his best to raise him with honor. And Johnny, with his expressive eyes and quiet gravitas, became the emotional compass of the show. Over 5 seasons, The Rifleman aired 168 episodes, and Johnny appeared in every one. He wasn't a background player or a supporting role, he was essential. The show's success turned him into a household name and earned him an Emmy nomination at just 13. It also introduced him to an entirely new level of public attention. Magazine covers, fan mail, personal appearances. Suddenly, the young boy who had once worked for free was one of the most recognizable faces on television. But the impact of The Rifleman extended beyond personal fame. Behind the scenes, a subtle but crucial shift was occurring. Midway through the show's run, Chuck Connors had grown frustrated, both with the direction of the show and his compensation. He considered stepping away, and producers even explored other actors who might fill the role. Yet none of them could replicate the bond that Connors shared with Johnny. It wasn't just about the role of Lucas McCain. It was about the father and son dynamic that had captured America's heart. And without Johnny, that dynamic didn't exist. Realizing this, producers increased Connors' salary and the show continued. In a quiet but powerful way, Johnny had saved The Rifleman, not with negotiations or ultimatums, but simply by being irreplaceable. Fame had now fully arrived, but with it came the quiet complexity of growing up under a national spotlight and navigating the fine line between performance and reality. Though The Rifleman painted a portrait of fatherly devotion and filial respect, the reality behind the scenes told a more complicated story. The bond between Johnny Crawford and Chuck Connors may have looked warm on screen, but away from the cameras, their relationship was marked by distance, misunderstanding, and quiet strain. To audiences, Chuck Connors was the perfect TV father. Firm but fair, protective yet kind. But Johnny, even as a young actor, saw through the veneer. He found Connors' off-screen behavior less admirable. By Johnny's own account, Connors could be brash, overly playful to the point of distraction, and often carried himself with a sense of aloofness that clashed with Johnny's more earnest nature. In interviews years later, Johnny described him not with bitterness, but with honesty. As a man who didn't take things as seriously as perhaps he should have, someone whose offhand antics could undermine the careful balance Johnny tried to maintain. It wasn't that they clashed outright. There were no dramatic confrontations or feuds to fuel the tabloids. But there was a quiet divide, a growing sense that, while they performed harmony on set, their worlds did not quite align. Johnny, mature beyond his years, was focused on the craft, while Connors at times seemed more amused by the fame and less burdened by the responsibility it carried. Still, Johnny never let this affect his performance. Whatever differences lingered off camera, he brought Mark McCain to life with undiminished sincerity. If anything, the contrast between fiction and reality may have strengthened his portrayal. The emotional honesty he brought to scenes with Connors came not from imitation, but imagination, a child yearning for the kind of idealized father figure that only existed in script pages and audience hearts. Despite these differences, the two remained linked throughout their lives by the legacy of the show. Decades later, they would reunite briefly on screen in The Gambler Returns. The luck of the draw, a nostalgic nod to the past, and a quiet moment of reconciliation, if not friendship. Johnny's view of Connors serves as a reminder that even in the most beloved Hollywood stories, reality is rarely as clean-cut as the screen suggests. There is often tension beneath the applause and distance beneath the smiles. But Johnny, in his quiet professionalism, never let the cracks show. He was steadfast, loyal to the story, the character, and the audience. As The Rifleman came to an end in 1963, Johnny was still only 17. And though he had just wrapped the defining chapter of his young life, he would soon reveal that his talents extended far beyond the frontier town of North Fork. When Johnny Crawford began to shift from acting to music, some fans were puzzled. Why would a successful television star, already beloved for his role on one of America's favorite westerns, choose to step away from the screen? But for Johnny, it was less a departure than a return. Not to fame, but to something more personal, his roots. Music was not a passing interest for Johnny. It ran through his family history like a golden thread. His grandfather, Alfred Eugene Marin, had been a respected violinist in Germany and Belgium before immigrating to the United States in the early 20th century. He performed with esteemed orchestras, including the New York Philharmonic, and brought with him not only technical brilliance, but a deep reverence for melody and tradition. Alfred's devotion to his art left an imprint on the entire Crawford family. Johnny's mother played piano, his brother shared his artistic instincts, and his uncle, Bobby Crawford, had worked closely with legendary composer Irving Berlin to co-found the Crawford Music Corporation. This was not a family dabbling in the arts for amusement. It was a lineage of musicians and performers who saw music as both craft and legacy. After finishing his military service in the late 1960s, Johnny found himself drawn once again to the music of the past. While stationed in New York, he had befriended filmmaker Charles L. Turner, who introduced him to the rich catalog of 1930s musicals. These sounds, lilting, romantic, full of melancholy and charm, resonated with Johnny more deeply than the loud rhythms of modern pop. He didn't want to chase trends. He wanted to revive something that felt timeless. In 1961, Johnny recorded his first single, Daydreams. Backed by the reputation of the Rifleman and supported by Delphi Records, the song found quick success. Over the next few years, Johnny released 3 full albums and scored 8 singles on the Billboard Top 100. His voice, smooth, earnest, and tinged with longing, recalled the great crooners of an earlier era. He wasn't trying to sound young, he was trying to sound sincere. But Johnny's greatest musical endeavor came later, with the creation of the Johnny Crawford Dance Orchestra. More than a vanity project, this group was his love letter to the jazz and big band sounds of the 1920s and 30s. He carefully curated arrangements, often performing with vintage instruments and period-authentic stylings. The orchestra played not just for applause, but for preservation. In reviving these nearly forgotten songs, Johnny was keeping history alive, the way he always had, whether through acting, rodeo, or music. For him, Music was not an escape from acting, but a deeper expression of the same yearning. To tell stories, to stir feeling, to connect. He had made his name with a rifle in his hand and a look of earnest determination. Now, he sought to enchant with a melody and a memory. While the world remembered Johnny Crawford for his performances on screen and on stage, he was never content to live within just one role. Beyond the carefully lit sets and recording studios, Johnny found meaning and often peace in places few fans would have imagined. In the dust of a rodeo arena, in the quiet halls of a military training center, and in the thrilling pursuit of reinvention. Rodeo may have seemed an unexpected path for a former child star, but for Johnny, it was as natural as the turning of a saddle. Years spent portraying Mark McCain had taught him to ride, rope, and carry himself like a cowboy. But where some might leave those skills behind with the character, Johnny took them with him and made them real. He joined both the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association and the American Junior Rodeo Association, proving that his affection for the Western lifestyle went far beyond costume and script. He didn't just dabble, he competed. Steer wrestling, calf roping, bronc riding, and even bull riding became part of his repertoire. He practiced trick roping with the same focus he brought to acting, mastering the delicate movements that turned a cowboy's tool into an art form. Crowds came expecting a celebrity. What they got was a genuine cowboy, one who had earned his place in the arena not through fame, but through discipline. Then, in 1965, just as his music and rodeo careers were gathering steam, Johnny made a decision that surprised everyone. He enlisted in the United States Army. The Vietnam War loomed large, and the choice to serve wasn't common among rising entertainers. But for Johnny, it wasn't about making headlines or curating an image. It was about duty. He began with basic training at Fort Bliss in Texas before being transferred to the Army Pictorial Center in New York. There, he found a rare harmony between service and artistry. Using his storytelling skills, he helped produce training films for soldiers, a role that may not have garnered fame, but carried quiet purpose. He once joked in a letter home that the military haircut felt like a modern-day scalping, but beneath the humor lay pride. He believed in the work, in the message, and in giving something back. By the time he was honorably discharged in 1967, Johnny had risen to the rank of sergeant. The experience left him changed, steadier, more reflective, and perhaps more aware of the quiet sacrifices made far from any camera lens. This chapter of his life rarely appeared in interviews or magazine profiles, but it mattered. It spoke to the heart of who he was, a man uninterested in celebrity for its own sake, drawn instead to craftsmanship, to challenge, and to contribution. Whether riding bulls, raising a rifle on screen, or editing a military reel, Johnny Crawford gave everything his full attention. The spotlight had dimmed, but his spirit never did. For all his public success, Johnny Crawford's most profound joys were often found far from the screen or stage. In the quiet stretches of his later years, he began to write a new kind of story, one not scripted or choreographed, but lived with sincerity and grace. It was during this period that Johnny discovered what many stars never do: the steady comfort of lasting love, the warmth of a chosen family, and the quiet satisfaction of life beyond fame. In 1990, decades after his whirlwind youth in Hollywood, Johnny reconnected with Charlotte Samko, his high school sweetheart. What began as a gentle rekindling soon blossomed into something enduring. The pair, now seasoned by time and experience, found that the bond they had once shared had not dimmed, but deepened. After 5 years of courtship, they married, not with Hollywood fanfare, but in a quiet celebration of trust and affection. Their union stood in quiet defiance of the often troubled romances that filled tabloids. There were no public arguments, no bitter separations. Instead, theirs was a partnership marked by loyalty, shared history, and mutual respect. Johnny, who had never had biological children, embraced Charlotte's daughters, Brenda and Jamie, as his own. He stepped into the role of father figure not with performance, but with presence, steady, dependable, and loving. Together, the family built a modest, joyful life. Their home, tucked away in a tranquil Los Angeles neighborhood, became a haven, not just from the noise of the world, but from the ghosts of Johnny's former fame. Within those walls, laughter replaced applause. Conversations took the place of interviews. And in the garden out back, Johnny often played his guitar, the chords drifting through the warm California air like echoes from a quieter, older time. He remained close with his brother Bobby, and the two often collaborated musically, performing together as the Crawford brothers. It was more than nostalgia. It was a continuation of their shared creative spirit, the same one that had guided them through the whirlwind of early success. Whether on stage or at family gatherings, Johnny brought the same thoughtful energy, calm, present, and deeply connected to those around him. In stepping away from the spotlight, Johnny didn't retreat. He returned to something essential. Love, family, tradition, these were the roles he cherished most. And in the eyes of those who knew him best, these were the roles he played to perfection. As Johnny Crawford entered the final chapter of his life, the applause had long faded, but the admiration remained. Fans remembered him fondly as the earnest Mark McCain, as the soft-voiced crooner of forgotten tunes, as the cowboy who never pretended. But behind closed doors, a silent battle was beginning, one that would slowly unravel the very fabric of the life he had so carefully built. In 2019, Johnny was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It was a cruel twist for a man whose life had been defined by memory. Memory of lines, of melodies, of moments lived through the eyes of characters he embodied. Suddenly, those memories began to slip away, first quietly, then unmistakably. Names became harder to recall. Faces grew unfamiliar. And soon, the man who had been so full of stories could no longer remember the roles that had made him famous. To those closest to him, it was heartbreaking. His wife Charlotte remained steadfast, caring for him with quiet devotion. Friends rallied, and a GoFundMe campaign was launched to help support the mounting costs of his care. He spent his last months in an assisted living facility, surrounded by vintage photographs and keepsakes from a past he could no longer access, a silent gallery of a life once lived in full. Then, in April of 2021, another tragedy arrived. Johnny contracted COVID-19, which quickly led to pneumonia. Already weakened from Alzheimer's, he was unable to fight the infection. On April 29, 2021, he passed away at the age of 75, with Charlotte by his side. His departure was as quiet as his performances had once been stirring, gentle, final, and deeply mourned. News of his passing spread quickly, with tributes pouring in from fans and fellow performers. Actor Scott Baio wrote, "Johnny was a real cowboy and will be greatly missed." Others recalled the innocence he brought to the screen, the elegance with which he navigated fame, and the kindness he extended behind the scenes. He was remembered not for scandals or spectacle, but for character, both the ones he played and the one he lived. Johnny Crawford's life ended not with a grand finale, but with a soft closing curtain. And yet, in that quiet, there was dignity. In the love that surrounded him, there was peace. The boy who once lit up American television may have forgotten the roles he played, but those who watched him never did. His story, though tinged with sorrow, remains one of depth, resilience, and quiet triumph. Johnny Crawford never chased the spotlight. From his earliest days on the Mickey Mouse Club to his unforgettable turn on the Rifleman, he seemed to walk alongside fame rather than pursue it. He didn't need scandal to be noticed or controversy to remain relevant. Instead, he built a career and a life on grace, steadiness, and genuine talent. For many, his image remains frozen in time. A boy with wide eyes, a soft voice, and a heart full of quiet courage. But behind that image was a man of remarkable depth. A musician who kept the sounds of the past alive. A cowboy who embraced the grit and discipline of rodeo not for publicity, but for passion. A soldier who answered the call to serve when the world was at war. And perhaps most importantly, a husband and father figure who found his truest purpose not in scripts or cameras, but in love, loyalty, and the bonds of chosen family. In the final years of his life, Johnny's world grew smaller, narrowed by illness, softened by time. Yet even as memories slipped through his grasp, the impression he left endured. It lived on in the hearts of his fans, in the tributes of friends, and in the quiet beauty of his home, a place that reflected all he cherished: music, history, tradition, and love. His estate, modest in comparison to Hollywood's towering fortunes, spoke volumes about the kind of man he was. It wasn't luxury that defined Johnny Crawford, but legacy. A life lived sincerely, generously, and without regret. As we look back on his story, we see more than a child star or a Western icon. We see an artist, a patriot, a romantic, someone who carried the weight of fame with humility and left this world not with a final bow, but with a soft, enduring echo. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.